Welcome. Hi, this is Thomas Hedlund. I've been a marriage family therapist for 42 years now in uh, California. I work with individuals and couples, a lot with relationship issues. This is going to be my fourth in a series of videos on relationship skills. Today's video is going to be on pathways through conflict so that you might see how we can get into traps and how we can get ourselves out of them when conflict inevitably arises in our interpersonal relationships, whether they're your marriage or with your children or your employer or coworkers. The relationship expert John Gottman, basically says that as conflict goes, so goes the relationship. So I'm going to talk about two distinctly different ways that this breaks down for people. I think you'll see as I talk about this that this will actually dovetail all completely with the other videos, especially the first one on managing reactivity and self-mastery in relationships. So you might want to go back if you haven't seen that one and review it after you've seen this one. So we're going to be talking about paths through conflicts today. Conflict's inevitable. Heaven knows we have it in ourselves. So you put two people in a room together with different histories, different backgrounds, different conditioning, and they're certainly going to have conflict with one another. And the way that most of us have learned to deal with conflict is our role models. And those are basically how we saw when we were quite small, how we saw our parents or our caregivers manage conflict and or the choices that were available to us when we were quite small. So we're going to deal with kind of the issues that come up around how people generally tend, when conflict arises and they feel any degree of threat, that they become defensive or closed. They want to protect themselves from experiencing pain and fear. And so we're going to look at what happens and what the consequences are when that happens. So moving right into the presentation, people, when we are defensive and closed, we stop taking personal responsibility for our feelings, our behavior, and our consequences. And we do that in three very specific ways that are all part of your brainstem response of fight, flight, and freeze. So fight is you're going to try and dominate and control the other person. You're going to try and change them by using either disapproval or fear. That's the fight reaction. Flight is physically or emotionally, I'm out of here. I'm going to withdraw or resist sexually, emotionally, physically. And freeze is the more passive, compliant response where I'll just give myself up out of fear of conflict or disapproval. So fight, flight, and freeze are the perfect solutions to your problems when your life is at stake. But as I've said in earlier videos, they're not the best skills to be used in long-term relationships because they're going to be just too drastic for us. So let's take a little deeper look into what happens here. So when we use fight, flight, and freeze, and really all there is are those three different ways to do this, there's really actually quite a limited number of relationship patterns and results. We form protective circles. You can have two people trying to control each other. That's a power struggle. Both people, a lot of passion, a lot of intensity, a lot of conflict, not necessarily any resolution. So that's the control option. The next one would be control compliance. In people of my generation, that would be the traditional marriage or sort of the boss secretary relationship where one person's determining all the rules and the other person's giving up themselves out of fear of conflict or disapproval to make it all work. That's control compliance. Now the next one, control indifference, is a real doozy because control indifference is a crazy maker because I'm trying to control you as much as possible, but you don't seem to care. So it makes me nutty that I can't seem to control you because you're indifferent to my efforts. And then the last and probably the saddest of them all is indifferent. And these are really broken relationships where people, they're just not going to get into it anymore. They know it never turns out for the best for them. And so, but both people have kind of withdrawn in the relationship. Now, here's the part of this that is both so sad and so predictable. When you do this, when you use these tools on relationship conflicts, especially intimate relationships, marriages, partners, significant others, we end up with the negative consequences of power struggles that don't resolve, pain and distance, from one another, a lack of fun and joy. There can be boredom because you're just not, you're not able to mobilize your passions in a satisfactory way. Could be lack of sex, depending upon the relationship, and feeling unloved and unloving. So that really, these are how relationships break and how we, by the time people come into therapy in my office, they've already exhausted all their skills. And pretty much they've been using these particular things when they're under stress. When you're not under stress, you may be able to completely, maintain your perspective, manage your emotions, because you're not so significantly involved that you're going to really feel threatened by the circumstances. I know the modeling in my own particular family growing up was that what I saw people do was they just attacked one another. So I grew up and I just thought that, anytime there was a conflict, I felt attacked. Whether I was being attacked or not, that was my interpretation. And of course, then I would become defensive. Nothing really good ever came from that. So now let's talk about what happens on the other side of the equation. Your limbic system, that fear center in your brain, can operate 7 times faster than you think. So there's no completely preventing reacting in relationships. The key is, and I'll cover this in future videos, bringing in a set of skills where you can regulate your emotions, your fears, stay calm, relax, be curious, ask questions. So even though you might react at first, you take a couple deep breaths and you say, I'm here and I'm open to learning. I'll take complete responsibility. What I tell people is I want you to take 100% of your 50% of the responsibility in this interaction, 100% of your 50%. So are you taking full responsibility for your feelings, your behavior, and the consequences of that? So it's a very high accountability model. Nobody else makes anybody feel or do anything, I say, unless they're penetrating the surface of your skin. We create and generate all of our own reality of our perceptions, interpretations, and conditionings. So in this other learning side of the equation with conflict, I'm going to be learning something about myself, and I'm going to be learning something new about my partner. And, so we're going to explore. I'm going to be willing to be introspective, take feedback, ask questions, and learn about you, and in all likelihood also learn about me. Now, what happens here, there's 3 different areas and conditions that we really have to kind of go into when we look at this. The first and most important, perhaps of all in some ways, is just the belief that there's important reasons for why people feel and act the way they do. So there's no shame involved in this. As I said, most of it is early modeling, it's conditioning, it's sometimes survival skills that we acquired early in our life when we had no perspective whatsoever because we were just a child. So the belief in important reasons means there's nothing wrong with you and there's nothing wrong with me. Now, the real big issue in terms of the skill set that you need is the willingness and open to being affected by experiencing transitory pain or fear, because I'm going to be knowing something, the truth about myself, and finding out the truth about you. So I know in my own personal experience with marital counseling, sometimes when we start exploring things, the picture that emerged was not that flattering to me. It was really kind of unpleasant for me to think that, I didn't know that I could do that sort of thing, and that's not very attractive. So, the idea behind this, one of my mentors said, is you're going to be in between the two trapeze bars. The old ways aren't going to be working. You're not going to rely on those survival mechanisms, but the new ways might not yet be formed yet. I've mentioned this, and I'll define it further later in acquiring the skill of differentiation. But in doing this, I'm gonna be having to kind of hang out in that anxiety and manage that anxiety and stay calm while I'm learning something more about you and perhaps something about myself. And as I mentioned in the very first self-mastery video, like an advanced communication skill is when you can take a direct hit, somebody says something that feels very threatening or unflattering, and instead of becoming defensive, you just simply say, wow, whew, that kind of hurts. I didn't know you felt that way about me. Tell me more about how I've been affecting you. Can you imagine what that would be like to be on the side wanting to tell somebody something that they may not like and have them say, wow, you're so important to me. I want to know more about this. Tell me more. And still be able to just kind of regulate your emotions while you're receiving what may seem like, in the moment, very bad news. So the areas that we look into and we explore, when I'm working with people, and that you can look into, and I will cover in subsequent videos. We're going to look at childhood issues, kind of what your fears may happen to be. Generally speaking, in relationships, people are governed by one of two fears, and they're both childhood fears. One is the fear of abandonment, and the other one is the fear of engulfment. I'm either going to get left behind, or I'm going to get swallowed up and not have a chance to be who I really am. And so we're going to look at how what our unique and personalized methods of protecting ourselves are, and what the consequences of that can be. Again, once you see what they are, you can begin to have choices that you might not have had until you've really examined this. Because again, as long as you're reacting, it's not really a choice. This is all neurobiological training and conditioning that's taking place. What our expectations are is a real interesting one. There are three different kinds of expectations. There's conscious verbal expectations. That means you and I know about it and we talk about it. Could be an example of we're going to save our money, for the kids' college. We're going to only take one vacation. But we know about what it is, what we expect of one another, and we can talk about it. The next one is unconscious but nonverbal. Those are the kind of the no-talk rules that we have in families and relationships where we both know about it, but there's some kind of agreement not to talk about it. Now, that could be even, we don't talk about dad's drinking. We don't talk about how much I work. We don't talk about whatever it may happen to be. And but we both kind of know what it is. We're just not going to bring that to the surface. And then the last one, which are the ones that really get folks, are, they are unconscious, non-verbalized expectations. And everybody has a set of those. They come from their, how we did it in my family as opposed to how you did it in your family. I sheepishly like to use the example that when I moved in with the woman that's to be my wife, in my family, I was in a military family, and Dad always shopped at the base exchange on Sundays. He came home and he built, we have a slab of beef, and everybody'd sit around the table. He'd either barbecue it or they'd, cook it in the oven. But Sunday night was a big dinner night. Well, it turns out my wife, she had two school teachers for parents. And so Sunday night, they were getting ready for school. So it was leftovers night in her family. Everybody was kind of on their own. Well, I moved in and I'm kind of waiting around on Sundays for her to cook a dinner. But she has no plans to cook a dinner. And over time, without me ever saying a word to her about that, she sort of figured out that I was kind of expecting for her to cook it, not forget me doing it. I was expecting her to prepare a dinner. We could laugh about that later, but for a while, you can feel very disappointed, unloved, hurt, when these unconscious expectations start to come to the surface over time in a relationship, obviously the goal is to make those unconscious ones and the nonverbal ones conscious and verbal, so you know about it and you can talk about it. And now here's the great news, okay? Because this is all the stuff that people want out of their relationships, but sometimes can't figure out how to achieve. The results when you can do this in a relationship and be open to one another, have conversations, you can start to have intimate love, passionate sex, fun and joy, shared pain, and a feeling in love and that you matter in the relationship, both to yourself and to the other person. You're not going to abandon yourself in the relationship. Okay, so now we're going to look at what happens when you start, when you can achieve and acquire these skills and practice them with some regularity. Your relationships start to evolve and grow. The greatest thing is conflict becomes something that gets resolved. It brings more and more understanding, more and more closeness, and there's less and less anxiety and threat in the relationship. So, this is where John Gottman could see that relationships, you're building a relationship rather than gradually eroding it. You get personal freedom, freedom to have your feelings, freedom to have your ideas, freedom to have your needs, and there's also personal and relationship growth that takes place. So as these things take place in the relationship, you're moving to a state of what I would call differentiated self-mastery, where you're two whole people and you don't have to whittle away on yourself or the other person to try and make the relationship less threatening to yourself. Now, one final sort of paradox that I would be remiss unless I mentioned is the paradox is that the more willing you are to engage in conflicts in this way, the less of them you're going to have. That's the paradox. People who try and avoid conflicts generally find that they're chasing them around. Avoiding them does not make them go away. So actually engaging in it, learning about yourself, learning about the other person is an opportunity actually to achieve more mastery, more self-control in the relationship, and actually conflict becomes not a threat, but a learning tool for understanding in the relationship. That will wrap up our presentation for today. And if you like this video, please feel free to like it, perhaps share it with your friends, and there will be another video drop in the next few weeks. Thank you very much for watching.